A 2,000-year-old analog computer, a spark plug fused into granite. According to the history books on your shelf, these objects simply cannot exist. The established narrative insists that the civilizations of these eras were primitive, people who were barely mastering fire or chipping away at flint tools. Yet, the artifact you are about to see display a level of mechanical engineering and industrial precision that rivals the 19th century. Here is the uncomfortable reality we have to face. If even one of these objects is authentic, then the entire linear timeline of human history collapses. It suggests that we are not the inventors of advanced technology. We are merely the ones remembering it. For decades, these items have been dismissed as children's toys, labeled as elaborate hoaxes, or they have simply vanished from museum archives without explanation. Mainstream science calls them anomalies to keep the timeline safe, but the truth calls them what they really are: evidence. We live with a comforting arrogance. We look back at the ancient world and see only a slow, painful climb, from stone tools to bronze swords, eventually leading to the silicon chip. We believe we are the apex, the first time humanity has truly mastered the physical world. But there are glitches in this timeline. And whenever one of these glitches, these out-of-place artifacts, is discovered, the reaction from the academic gatekeepers follows a precise, repeatable script. It almost always starts by accident. These objects aren't usually found by professors in tweed jackets. They're found by coal miners, deep-sea divers, or construction crews. Real people working the dirt. Then comes the second phase, the initial analysis. Metallurgists or engineers look at the object and realize the alloys are too pure, or the machining is too precise for the era. But then the third phase, the suppression, kicks in. The establishment steps in to correct the record. They label the object a natural concretion, a modern fraud, or the favorite catch-all phrase for anything they don't understand, a ritual object. Finally, the artifact is quietly moved to a dusty basement. The funding is cut, and the papers are never published. For a century, the system of denial worked, but it is failing now. Why? Because modern technology is stripping away the excuses. High-resolution 3D scanning, mass spectrometry, and microscopic analysis are revealing details that the naked eye missed 50 years ago. We can no longer look at a precision-engineered sphere and call a rock. The data is becoming impossible to ignore. In this video, we are going to examine 10 of these forbidden objects. We will look at the metallurgy, the physics, and the impossible timelines that mainstream science refuses to address. These are not 10 random mysteries. They are 10 pieces of a puzzle that depicts a very different history of the human race. And we begin with a device that sat dissolving on the ocean floor for 2 millennia, waiting for us to invent the technology capable of understanding what it actually was. Story 1. The Antikythera mechanism, the analog computer. It began in 1901, off the coast of a remote Greek island called Antikythera. Sponge divers, retreating from a storm, stumbled upon a shipwreck 150 feet down. Amidst the marble statues and pottery, they brought up a shapeless, calcified lump of bronze and wood. It sat in a museum courtyard, unnoticed, for months. It looked like nothing more than a corroded rock, but as it would dried and shrank, the rock cracked open, and inside, something impossible was waiting. Gears. Precision-cut, interlocking bronze gears. Not just one or two, but a complex assembly of at least 30 separate gears, packed into a wooden box no larger than a shoebox. The archaeological world went into immediate shock. According to the timeline, this ship sank around 60 BC. The Greeks of that era were supposed to be philosophers and potters, not industrial engineers. Gears of this complexity, specifically the differential gearing used to subtract the motion of the sun from the moon, should not appear in a historical record for another 1,500 years. So, how did the establishment react? They didn't rewrite the history books. They rewrote the artifact. For nearly 70 years, the mechanism was dismissed, Prominent historians argued that it must have been a modern clock that accidentally fell onto an ancient shipwreck. They claimed it was a hoax or misinterpretation. The cognitive dissonance was simply too great. If this machine was real, their understanding of the ancient world was wrong. And in academia, being wrong is far worse than being ignorant. It wasn't until the 1970s and later in 2006, when advanced X-ray tomography and HP imaging finally peered inside the corrosion, that the denial became impossible to maintain. This wasn't a clock. It was the world's first analog computer. It could predict eclipses decades in advance, track the irregular orbit of the moon with terrifying accuracy, and even calculate the dates of the Olympic Games. It was a portable mechanical cosmos. The implications are staggering. This level of miniaturization requires a manufacturing base, lathes, precision tools, and mathematical models that we thought didn't exist until the Industrial Revolution. The Antikythera mechanism proves that a high-technology society existed and then simply vanished. The knowledge to build this didn't evolve. It was lost. We entered the Dark Ages, and humanity forgot how to build computers for nearly 2 millennia. But if they had the processing power to model the universe, what else did they have? A computer implies a need for calculation, and calculation often implies a need for power. Which brings us to a clay pot in a rock that suggests electricity isn't as modern as we think. Story 2, the Baghdad battery, the power source. If the Antikythera mechanism was a computer, then what we found in 1938 might very well be the power supply. This discovery didn't happen on a wind-swept dig site. It happened in the dusty basement of the National Museum of Iraq. German archaeologist Wilhelm Koenig was sorting through a collection labeled as ritual objects, the convenient trash bin of archaeology, when he noticed something that shouldn't have been there. It was a simple yellow clay jar, about 5 inches tall. On the outside, it looked like standard pottery from the Parthian period, around 200 BC. But the interior design was specific. Inside the jar was a cylinder made of rolled copper sheet. Suspended inside that cylinder, but never touching it, was an iron rod, and the top was sealed with bitumen, a type of asphalt, to insulate the connection. Any first-year electrical engineering student will recognize this configuration immediately. It is not a ritual vessel. It is a galvanic cell. When Koenig filled a replica with an acidic liquid, grape juice, vinegar, or lemon juice, the interaction between the copper and the iron produced a steady electric current, about 0.5 volt to 2 volts. Connect 10 of them in a series, and you have a battery pack capable of electroplating gold onto silver. Yet, for decades, the scientific establishment refused to call it a battery. They insisted it was for storing sacred scrolls, despite the fact that the bitumen seal would have made retrieving a scroll impossible without breaking the jar. They argued that the presence of copper and iron was coincidental. Why? Because Alessandro Volta wasn't supposed to invent the battery until the year 1800, admitting that the Parthians, or the Babylonians before them, understood electrochemical principles would mean that the Age of Enlightenment was actually an age of rediscovery. If the ancients had electricity, even in a primitive form, the magic of the ancient world begins to look a lot more like technology. The golden touch of myths might simply have been electroplating. But if they had mastered power on the ground, is it possible they also attempted to master the sky? Story 3, the Saqqara bird, the aerodynamic artifact. If the Baghdad battery suggests the ancients had access to power, then an artifact discovered in 1898 forces us to ask an even more dangerous question. Do they understand the principles of flight? Deep within the Padiaman tomb in Saqqara, Egypt, French archaeologists unearthed a small sycamore-wood figure. It was dated to approximately 200 BC and sat alongside other ceremonial items. The museum cataloged it simply as a bird object, and for decades it gathered dust in the Cairo Museum, dismissed as a child's toy or a weather vane. But in 1969, Dr. Khalil Mesa, a medical doctor and keen student of aerodynamics, looked at the toy and noticed something that the archaeologists had missed. Nature does not design birds like this. Real birds have horizontal tail, feathers that fan out. This object possesses a vertical tail fin, a rudder, precisely like the one you would see on a modern aircraft. The wings are not merely decorative. They are shaped with a specific curvature. It is a reverse dihedral wing design, an airfoil engineered to generate lift. When experts built a balsa wood replica of the Saqqara bird and tested it, the results were undeniable. It was not a static statue. It was a glider. The aerodynamics were functional. The establishment remains firm. They insist it is merely an artistic representation of a falcon, a coincidence of carving. But falcons do not have rudders. We have to apply logic here. In every era of human history, toys are miniatures of the technology that surrounds them. A child plays with a toy car because real cars exist. A child plays with a toy rocket because real rockets exist. If the Saqqara bird is a model of a glider, where is the original? And if they understood lift and drag 2,000 years before the Wright brothers, what other impossible knowledge lies buried in the sediment? Perhaps the answer isn't in the sky, but locked inside the rock itself. Story 4, The London Hammer, the Time Traveler. If the Saqqara bird suggests we have forgotten the history of flight, this next artifact suggests we have the entire timeline of planet Earth wrong. In June of 1936, Max Hahn and his wife were walking along Red Creek near the town of London, Texas. They spotted a piece of loose rock with a piece of wood protruding from it. Curious, they took it home and cracked it open with a chisel. What they found inside defies every law of geology. Embedded within the stone was a hammerhead. The handle had turned to coal, but the head was intact. Here's the problem. The rock encasing the hammer is Ordovician limestone. According to the geological record, this rock formation is over 400 million years old. That is older than the dinosaurs. It is an era when life on Earth was mostly marine invertebrates. There were no trees for the handle, let alone humans to forge the iron. And the iron itself is an anomaly. When the hammerhead was analyzed by Battelle Memorial Laboratory in the 1980s, the results were baffling. It consisted of 96.6% iron, 2.6% chlorine, and 0.74% sulfur. It contained no carbon. This means it is not steel as we know it, yet it is harder than standard iron. Even more strangely, despite being exposed to the air since 1936, the metal has not rusted. The scientific establishment has a single word for this: concretion. They argue that dissolved minerals harden around a modern hammer, dropped by a miner in the 1800s. They claim the rock formed rapidly, in centuries rather than millions of years. But if rock can form that quickly, then our entire method of dating geological strata is flawed. If the rock dating is accurate, then someone was manufacturing iron tools 400 million years ago. Neither option is acceptable to the history books. So, the London Hammer sits in a small museum in Texas, ignored by the Smithsonian, a silent piece of evidence that suggests we are not the first ones to walk this planet. But if we have been here before, did we also map the world long before Columbus? Story 5, The Pyrie Reis Map, The Impossible View. If the London Hammer suggests we have been here for millions of years, then this next artifact proves that we knew the shape of the world long before modern history began. In 1929, historians discovered a gazelle skin map in the Topkapi Palace in Istanbul. It was compiled in 1513 by the Ottoman Admiral Pyrie Reis. At first glance, it looks like a standard medieval chart, but look closer at the bottom of the map. It depicts a landmass south of South America. It connects to the coast of Brazil and extends eastward. We know this landmass today as Antarctica. Here's the problem. Antarctica was not officially discovered until 1820. Pyrie Reis drew this map 300 years before anyone knew the continent existed. But the impossibility goes deeper. The map doesn't just show Antarctica. It shows the Queen Maud Land coast without ice. Modern geology tells us that Queen Maud Land has been covered by a mile-thick sheet of ice for at least 6,000 years. Yet, the Pyre Reese map shows rivers, mountain ranges, and precise coastal details that correspond perfectly to the seismic data we only obtained in the 1950s using ground-penetrating radar. How could a 16th century admiral know what lay beneath the ice? Pyre Reese himself wrote in the margins that he did not survey the land himself. He compiled his map from 20 older charts, some dating back to the time of Alexander the Great and beyond. He was copying data from a source map that is now lost to history. The mathematical projection used to create the map is equally baffling. It uses spherical trigonometry, a method of projecting the curve of the Earth onto a flat surface, with an accuracy that requires knowledge of the Earth's circumference that wasn't calculated until the 18th century. Mainstream historians dismiss the Antarctica connection. They claim it is simply the coast of South America bent to fit the page, or a lucky guess about mythical southern land. But lucky guesses do not reproduce latitude and longitude with near-perfect accuracy. Coincidence does not map a subglacial coastline that has been hidden for 6 millennia. This map is a document of inheritance. It is proof that a maritime civilization mapped the entire globe when Antarctica was still green, long before the Ice Age ended. And if they had the ships to map the world, did they also have the materials to build structures that would last forever? We travel next to India, to a pillar that defies the laws of chemistry. Story 6, the Delhi Iron Pillar, the Lost Metallurgy. If the Pyre Reese map suggests a lost knowledge of the Earth, then this next artifact proves a lost mastery of the elements themselves. Standing in the courtyard of the Qutb Minar complex in Delhi, India, is a column of iron that should not exist. It is 23 feet high and weighs over 6 tons. According to the inscription, it was forged around 400 AD, during the Gupta Empire. Here is the problem. Iron has a fatal flaw. It dies. When exposed to oxygen and moisture, it oxidizes. It rusts. And Delhi is not a dry desert. It is subjected to monsoon rains and high humidity every single year. Any modern iron structure left outside in this environment without constant painting and maintenance would have disintegrated into a pile of red dust centuries ago. Yet, for 1,600 years, the Delhi Iron Pillar has refused to corrode. For a long time, Western metallurgists dismissed it. They claimed it was a fluke of the climate, or that the ancient smiths just got lucky with a pure vein of ore. But in 2002, experts from the Indian Institute of Technology finally analyzed the surface. It wasn't luck. It was chemistry. They discovered that the pillar is coated in a microscopic layer of mesowite, a compound of iron, oxygen, and hydrogen. This layer forms a passive protective film that prevents rust from ever taking hold. How did they achieve this? By keeping the phosphorus in the iron. Modern steelmaking removes phosphorus because it makes the metal brittle. We prioritize strength over longevity. The ancient smiths of India, however, knew how to manipulate the phosphorus to create a self-healing skin. We paint the Golden Gate Bridge continuously to keep it from falling into the bay. We replace our cars every decade as the frames rot. Yet, a primitive culture created a monument that is effectively eternal. We have forgotten how to make things that last. But if they could forge metal that defies time, could they also shape stone that defies explanation? We move now to Egypt, and a disc that looks suspiciously like a part of a machine. Story 7, the Sabu disc, the propeller. If the Delhi Iron Pillar proves a lost mastery of chemistry, then this next artifact suggests a lost mastery of complex machining. In 1936, the Egyptologist Walter Emery was excavating the tomb of Prince Sabu in Saqqara, dated to around 3100 BC amidst the usual pottery and stone vessels. He found something that didn't fit. It was a circular disc made of schist, a fragile, sedimentary rock. It measures about 24 inches in diameter and is incredibly thin, but it is the shape that is a problem. The disc has three curved lobes that fold inward toward the center, resembling a steering wheel or a tri-bladed propeller. The rim is perfectly circular, and the center contains a precise hole, as if designed to mount onto a shaft. The Cairo Museum labels it a vase or an incense burner. This explanation is physically impossible. The object has no bottom, so it cannot hold liquid. It shows no signs of soot or heat damage, so it never burned incense. Furthermore, schist is extremely brittle. It flakes in layers. If you try to carve this complex, three-dimensional shape with a copper chisel and a stone hammer, the rock will shatter. To create these thin, curved blades without breaking the stone requires a technology that applies no impact force. It requires high-speed rotation and abrasive grinding. When modern engineers look at the Sabu disk, they don't see a vase. They see a flywheel. They see an impeller for a centrifugal pump. They see a component designed to spin. In fact, Lockheed Martin engineers have noted its striking resemblance to modern steam turbine housings. So, why would a prince from the First Dynasty be buried with a stone replica of a machine part? Perhaps it is a case of cargo cult behavior. The Egyptians of 3000 BC didn't build a machine. They remembered it. They carved a stone copy of a metal device from a previous age, a sacred relic of the gods whose technology they could no longer replicate. We are looking at a spare part for a machine that has rusted away into dust. But if they could machine stone with this level of precision, could they also manufacture objects that predate life itself? We travel next to South Africa, and a sphere that breaks the geological timeline by billions of years. Story 8. The Klerksdorp Spheres, the Manufactured Orbs. If the Sabu disk suggests a lost machine, then this next artifact suggests that the factory floor has been running for a very, very long time. For decades, miners digging in pyrophyllite deposits near Ottesdal, South Africa, have been pulling strange objects out of the rock. They are small metallic spheres, ranging from half an inch to 4 inches in diameter. They are not rough lumps of ore. They are distinct, geometric shapes. Some are blue metal with white flecks. Others are hollow shells filled with a spongy white substance. But the real impossibility is their age. The rock in which they are found is Precambrian. It is 3 billion years old. At that time, the Earth was a hostile, volcanic world. The only life that existed was single-celled algae and bacteria. There were no plants, no animals, and certainly no humans. Yet, these spheres possess a feature that screams artificial design. Running perfectly around the equator of many of these spheres are 3 parallel grooves. Geologists have tried to explain them away as limonite concretions, natural masses of mineral matter. They argue that nature simply formed these shapes over millions of years of sedimentation. But nature does not work in perfect parallel lines. Concretions are lumpy, irregular, and random. They do not come out of the ground looking like cricket balls with machine tool grooves. Furthermore, the metal shell of these spheres is incredibly hard, harder than steel. It cannot be scratched by a knife. If these are natural, they are a geological miracle that has never been replicated. If they're artificial, then we are left with a terrifying conclusion. Someone was manufacturing precision metal components on this planet when our ancestors were still just genetic soup. And if they were building things then, did they also leave behind components that we are still finding today? We move now to a discovery made in 1998, where a modern electrical component was found inside a stone that shouldn't exist. Story 9, the Williams Enigmalith, the component. If the Klerksdorp sphere suggests that manufacturing existed billions of years ago, then this next artifact brings the impossible technology uncomfortably close to the present day. In 1998, an electrical engineer named John Williams was hiking in a remote area of North America. He looked down and saw a strange rock half buried in the dirt. He dug it out, cleaned it off, and realized he was holding a technological nightmare. Protruding from a solid piece of granite is what appears to be a 3-pronged electrical plug. It looks suspiciously like a modern XLR connector or a heavy-duty electrical component. The prongs are about 3 millimeters in diameter. The matrix surrounding them is not soft sedimentary rock or concrete. It is hard granite. Geology tells us that granite is formed from magma cooling deep underground over millions of years. It is not formed around plastic or metal objects dropped by hikers. For this component to be embedded inside the stone, it had to be there while the rock was still molten lava. Skeptics immediately cried hoax. They claimed Williams simply glued a plug into a hole. But X-ray analysis tells a different story. The component does not stop at the surface. It extends deep into the rock structure. The stone grips the object so tightly that there is no trace of glue or welding. The rock formed around it. Furthermore, the component itself is not made of plastic, wood, or metal. It appears to be a white, ceramic-like material, and it exhibits a weak magnetic attraction. This is a classic out-of-place artifact. If the rock is as old as the geology suggests, perhaps 100,000 years or more, then who was manufacturing electrical connectors before the invention of the wheel? The scientific community has largely refused to test the object, claiming that doing so would destroy it. But the real reason may be fear. Fear that carbon dating the rock would return a date that science cannot explain. We are looking at a piece of hardware from a lost civilization, frozen in time like a fly in amber. But if they had hardware, did they also have the software of life itself? We travel finally to Colombia, and a disk that reveals knowledge we only discover with a microscope. Story 10, the genetic disk, the biological data. If the Williams enigma suggests they had the hardware, then this final artifact proves they possess the software of life itself. Deep in the collection of Professor Jamie Gutierrez in Bogota, Colombia, sits a circular disk made of lyddite. Lyddite is a hard black stone, nearly as hard as granite, but it is also brittle. It has a flaky structure, similar to flint. If you try to carve it with a chisel, it shatters. To shape lyddite requires advanced tools that grind rather than strike. But the impossibility of the genetic disk isn't just how it was made, it is what it depicts. Carved into the surface are images that should not exist in the archaeological record. They are not stylized gods or animals. They are biological diagrams. We see the male sperm. We see the female egg. We see the moment of conception. And we see the specific stages of fetal development, from a cluster of cells to a fully formed human baby. Here's a problem. The human sperm is invisible to the naked eye. The details of early cell division are microscopic. We did not discover the existence of sperm until 1677, when Anthony van Leeuwenhoek invented the high-powered microscope. We did not understand the stages of fetal development until centuries later. Yet this disk, estimated to be at least 6,000 years old, contains a medical textbook carved into stone. The scientific establishment has a simple answer. It is a modern fake. Why? Because according to their timeline, the people of ancient Colombia did not have microscopes. Therefore, the object cannot be real. But no one has explained how a faker managed to carve intricate biological details into a stone that shatters under pressure without leaving any trace of modern tool marks. This disk is not art. It is a data storage device. It is a hard drive made of stone, preserving the most critical knowledge of all, how we are made. If they knew metallurgy, if they knew aerodynamics, if they knew astronomy, and if they knew genetics, then we are forced to admit the terrifying truth. We are not the first advanced civilization on this planet. We are just the first ones to forget.